All right, Beyonders, welcome back to Tabletop and Beyond. This is Winning Warcry. Just 1 week after we recorded our last episode, the NOVA Open had happened. It has happened, and we are here to talk about the tournament and what happened during it. It was a great event, and I know Jason was there to help me run the event. And Dan, I know you were following along closely, so we're excited to talk about it all together here tonight. And I've had many requests from our listeners to get this episode out quick. Gosh darn it, they want to hear what we have to think about it. So I appreciate everybody for. Yeah, gosh darn it. So I thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for being interested in this. And also thank you to all of our players who played the game, because we wouldn't have anything to talk about if there weren't people who didn't show up to the tournament, right? So those, in my opinion, the people who were playing this last weekend were all the big winners of this, because overall it seemed to be a really fun event, and people were coming away with smiles, which I think is a good sign of a great tournament. So we are going to skip our hobby table today, mostly because Jason and I, it's like a disaster of terrain all over our table, or the remnants of terrain anyway, for having painted up like basically 3 boxes of terrain to get on the table for the tournament to make sure that we had enough tables for everybody. And I'm looking over at my table right now, and I just got to figure out what I need to do next. Probably my Horns of Heshut that I've been putting off forever, especially since we saw some amazing lists with the Horns this last weekend. So, but we're going to skip that. And I think that there's been plenty of coverage of the NOVA Open reveals. The funny thing about the NOVA Open reveals for us, Jason, is that we're always setting up something during the NOVA Open reveals. We're setting up our tables, our terrain, all that stuff. So we're never like actually in the event when they're revealing this stuff. And by the time that we're able to digest it, like the next day, we're in the tournament. And so we're usually like 2 or 3 days late to the NOVA Open reveal party, even though it's happening like literally like 50 yards away from us.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like we don't get to see the reveal stuff until like days later. So there's been plenty of people that have covered it. I know that Off-Meta Musings has done like a big long video about it, but I am excited to see this box come out.
Right here, buddy.
What's that?
Nothing. You're good.
Oh, okay.
Just that I put out a video like hours after it happened, but
oh, you did?
okay, you were in
So
the
see,
tournament.
like,
You didn't
here's the
notice.
problem,
Yep.
Dan. Yeah, here's the problem is like I'm like not monitoring anything over the weekend, right? So
Yep.
the only reason I know Off-Meta Musings video came up is because his came up in my short feed, and I'm like, oh, he did a video about it. So maybe we need to cut some shorts off of your video, Dan. You know?
I can't stand the shorts system, but it is YouTube's pushing it pretty hard. I think they want to compete with Instagram, and I think that's what they think is going to do it. So they give you a lot of incentives for doing shorts.
Yeah, for sure. But so go check out Salty's video. We'll tag it up here in the little corner thing here over there somewhere. And you can check out his video on it, because we'll put a co-host video in here, right? Absolutely.
Whatever you want.
Yeah. But you know what? We're here to talk about the tournament, because that was really the big news for our little Warhammer community, especially those that are in our Discord. The cool thing about our tournament is that we attracted a lot of folks from the East Coast. We had a bunch of people from New York who came down, New York, New Jersey area. We had a lot of people of course, in the Washington, D.C. area that came. We had folks from Pennsylvania and Ohio that came out. Chris Hyde obviously came from New Mexico, which is, a good trip for him. So it was great to see him there. And so it was a very kind of East Coast centric tournament. And I hope in the future we can get more folks from across the country to come and play. I understand the NOVA Open's in a funny weekend where you're either totally free or you're not free at all, right? Like it's kind of not like in the middle. It's just because it's Labor Day weekend, and so either people have plans at the end of summer plans, or they're totally open and they can come. So it doesn't seem to be like there's like folks that are just coming for 1 day or 2 days. Like they're either all in or they're all out. So And I think that's just timing there. But yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the tournament.
Yeah.
We hosted our tournament. We talked a little bit about the format 2 videos ago when we did the Royal Beast Flayers. I did the introduction of the format. So this was supposed to be a 32-person tournament with 4 pools of 8 that would compete within their pools. The winners would then move on to the top bracket. The second place folks in those pools would play for the so you had the shield, the cup, the bowl, the shield, and plate, and those are tournament names that I got from rugby. So I have put together rugby tournaments in the past where you had 16 to 20 teams that were competing in basically a day tournament. They'd have 5 to 6 games that they would play. And basically, this was a rugby sports tournament. And so you'll probably hear us compare this as a sports style tournament versus a Swiss style tournament. And so that's kind of the designator when we're talking about it. And anyway, so having put together rugby tournaments and liking that format, we decided to try this out where we had, again, the pool play and then elimination play. And I want to talk about, well, we'll get into it. So what we did is we obviously had some interesting matchups that happened in the pool play because people realized that in order to get to that top spot, you needed to win 3 games to get into that top bracket. You needed to be 3-0. And we had 4 3-0 winners that ended up competing for that top bracket. But what were some interesting matchups or scenarios that you guys ended up seeing throughout the tournament that caught your eye? Dan, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I guess my question to you is, do you mean like specific players and lists, or do you mean matchups specifically? I do think one cool thing that your sort of format did create. Unfortunately, I am going to be the one raining on a few parades in terms of
Sure.
the format, but one thing that I do think was really cool is the way it kind of created collision courses
Mm-hmm.
throughout the tournament, where, in such and such pool, this listed well and this listed well. Oh, but they didn't match up this round, so that means like, are they gonna match up in round 3, or is it there was some really cool kind of situations like that I was really interested in. For example, the one pool that had the Chimera in it and had the Horns of Hashut in it, where, they spent their first 2 rounds just 20-0ing their opponents, just
Mm-hmm.
laughing their opponents off the field, and that created a really exciting sort of vibe around, like, well, what's gonna happen when they finally face off? And then it turned out that, they faced off on an objective mission where a 13 or a 12 model list against a 5 model list is not gonna be close if you can bracket the Chimera quickly, and then the flamethrower just brackets the Chimera in round 1, and then all of a sudden, the game is over immediately. But even though that sort of was a little anticlimactic, it was, like, really exciting seeing
Mm-hmm.
that evolve. And then as far as lists go, I thought that Chimera list was a real statement in that he went 4-1, really great performance, and his only loss was, a pretty bad scenario list matchup. And otherwise, the Chimera just laughed everything it played against off the field. In bracket play, it wasn't close. He was in the third placers bracket.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the criticisms I had of we can get into this later, but there were a lot of situations where the second most impressive list in the pool ended up third on tiebreakers, even though they had often like beaten the second place or things like that.
Mhm.
But
Mm-hmm.
um, the y- the performance there was just incredible in terms of how well it did, and the the list around the Chimera was not particularly like spicy or necessarily like really min-maxed out of its mind, and it's still just dominated everything. So I know a lot of people who have been saying the Chimera is not a problem. It's really just plague bearers that are a problem, and people bringing the Chimera with plague bearers like is fine and good, but it's really the plague bearers, and they're just picking something big to go with it. And I think this really proves that that couldn't be further from the truth. That
Yeah.
Andy, if if matchups had been different and he'd met different players in different missions, I think he could have won the tournament, and that should terrify everybody for future large events until GW does something.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in his list because we talked about this 5 models and then the Chimera. So you're talking about a 6 model list, and 4 of those models were like gores. You know what I mean? Like, not too beefy, and like they're just there to be bodies, and so it was pretty interesting. So I agree. I think because I mean the plague bearer list has how many plague bearers in it with the Chimera? Like 6 or 7?
Yeah, I usually get to 8 models.
Yeah.
5 of them are plague bearers, and then you can get some other slightly better fighters in there just a little bit. But yeah, he was 2-1 on objective missions, for example.
Right.
You know what I mean? So 2-1 on objective missions with a 5 model list is really wild. So I was really impressed with that.
Well, and I'll say too that the last objective mission that he was on was power struggle, right? And so
Or was that the first one?
That was the first one. What was the last one? Supremacy.
Yeah.
Am I getting my names wrong? I'm probably getting my names wrong.
They're so similar because they're both the ones with 4 objectives.
Yeah. And that last one, those objectives are super close. So if you have that Chimera in the middle, he can Dragon Maul almost anything on any objective.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So like it's funny because that last and that's the one where it's not supremacy, season control. That's the mission. It's season control.
Yep.
And so that's the one that if you get all 4 objectives, you get 10 battle points in that round.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of 1 for each of them. Right. And so you're set to try to like capture all of them, which is a tough thing to do. But if he can get the Chimera in the middle of those, you can literally Dragon Maul like from each of those objectives. So that's a tough one to keep your guys on and not get Dragon Mauled to death. Right. So that's because they are that close. And in fact, I had to make a rule that I think that we should probably ask GW about. Because this is a rule in Age of Sigmar, but it's not specifically made in Warcry, which is the rule should be that a model can only count towards 1 objective, and you need to determine it at the end of its activation. Because the Chimera, where it was sitting, could have counted towards 2 objectives. In terms of controlling them. And so that rule is in Age of Sigmar very clearly, right? That like if you have a model that's contending for 2 objectives, you have to choose which one that it is controlling. And I think that Warcry needs that same thing because of some of the oval bases or bigger bases that they have. And then you determine that at the end of its activation. So we made that kind of fact rule for this tournament because of that specifically. So
I think I disagree with you there. I kind of like that cavalry can count for 2, especially because most cavalry is just really overcosted and kind of bad. But I agree, it's kind of broken with monsters. I think monsters in general, just the implementation, they didn't get it right. Because I agree, it's totally broken with monsters where you can count for 2. And then you're right on supremacy, thinking about the geometry, you can be counting for 2 and reaching the other 2 with Dragon Maul, which is just wild that you can do that. So, man, I just think they've got to go back to the drawing board with how monsters work and maybe even think about whether they should be in the game.
Yeah, and it's true, man, because I played Andy on his first round with I was playing Staffbot at the time, right? And the purpose of Staffbot is to make sure no one has a buy and has to just sit at the table. They can still play and roll some dice and have fun. But I was kind of spending the whole time thinking about his Chimera and recognizing that, even with because I think our staff bot, that was a Night Haunt list. Even with my fly to be able to get all the way around the board, there was absolutely nowhere on the board I could go to where he couldn't grab me if he had a triple. Like nowhere.
Yeah.
Nowhere at all. No blocking, no, with other models, nothing. He could just position and grab them all 6 inches and pull me.
Right.
It's so broken, man. It's too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other monsters, at least, they went up so many points that they're just like, you make
just
so many
kills the list to put them
sacrifices,
in.
but
Yeah.
it just skews up the list. But the Chimera, it still functions. And so, yeah, it's just really weird and wild on the board.
It's because it has in my opinion, a smaller base than some of the other monsters, like like the big Arachnarok has like a dinner plate, right?
Yeah.
So it has like a smaller base, and it can fly. So terrain is not a big deal to that Chimera compared to other big monsters, right?
And the Rampage FAQ kind of made it harder to bracket it, because now your big hitters that are slower can't get in as easily.
100%. Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yep.
But you're right. Like, I tested at home and I found Thundercats were actually terrifying for the Chimera, because like they could come in from 10 inches away, and if there was a rampage, they could come in and just like hit it 3 times from 10 inches away, and like that would be the game. But now like a rampage does nothing for you. So that's
unless you get a 6 and then you only move 6.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think it's kind of interesting.
So good on you, Andy, for bringing a Chimera.
Yeah. Exactly.
We need, the food for thought is good, and I think it would
have the data.
Gotta have the data, and he brought a not that broken surrounding list to go with it too, and so the fact that he was still, took it to 4-1. I'm sure he had to like think pretty hard about where he placed it, but he succeeded, because he left you guys thinking, man, like it's broken what you can do on this specific scenario with where he placed it, and that's good, smart play, and really leaves a lot of food for thought.
Yeah, and I also want to call Andy out. I'm going to share my screen, right, because he brought 2 custom made tables that were just amazing. So here's the first one, right? I click the share button. There we go. Right. Beautiful table. Like he put a lot of hard work into that, right? And this is a fun table, basically defending 2 forts across the moat.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh wow.
And there's different levels of terrain. So this is like an inch up, right? And he made an effort intentionally to make sure things were the 1 inch, 2 inch, and 3 inch. So you didn't have this kind of funny, like, 1.25 inch Warcry problem. It was things looked great and natural and earthy, but they were still 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch. And then let me show the.
Well, I was going to say too, real quick, that terrain's a little high for my liking. However, with the stairs there, that negated the problematic height. So even mounts could go up there if they needed to.
Yeah, and I saw when people were playing objective missions, where the objectives were close to the terrain, most players did the right thing, right? Like they nudged over the castle and put the terrain on the battle floor so that you could capture it from whether you were standing above or below, which made for interesting play, because if you had a flyer or someone that would just jump to the top and sit up there, like, all right, and the guys would just move to the bottom and they'd contest it. Yeah. Right. Because objectives are infinite points to space, at least the way that we played at the tournament. So beautiful terrain, super fun to play on when you get to see stuff like that. Very immersive, right? Let me make sure I don't remove you, Dan. I almost removed you by accident just now. But here is let me throw this one up there because I want to show the other one that he made. This one was also really, really good looking. And this one was interesting terrain to play on too. It kind of had this like futuristic, like, barren landscape, but like some super, power. I tell you, Justin and I were both thinking, right? What did you think this looked like, Justin?
The Fortress of Solitude from Superman.
That's right.
Oh,
I just wanted to go over there and push ice crystals down, right?
Yeah, it does.
But
somebody who uses that same 3D printed set, and he made it look like a realm gate.
Yeah.
So we call it the Realm Gate when we play on it. Yeah, that's really cool.
So this is 3D printed terrain from a company in England that donated it to us. And let me look up their name while you're talking about it, Jason.
Yeah, but same thing here, right? Like these are like an inch height, 2-inch height, and then 3-inch height. So he did a really good job kind of sticking with the standard like Warcry height / obstacle kind of thing. And it gave a nice flavor, you know, and also it had nice pathways so that you had movement around there. You know, if you had a monster, you could kind of still play in the game with it. But I thought it was really cool to have those kind of at the two tables there. And I think people were excited to play on them. So thanks, Andy, for bringing that.
So the terrain that he had, both the castle one and this sort of Superman Fortress of Solitude, you know, columns that are rising from the ground are from Dark Fantastic Mills. And again, they do 3D printing out of England, and they have just amazing terrain. And a lot of it is modular. So like that terrain, that castle stuff, like you could have actually built a longer wall that's magnetized, and you could like mix and match and stuff like that. So it's very cool. You know, you could lay one down on the ground as if it like it crumbled, or you know, different things. So it was really, really neat. And I think one of our who ended up winning the table, Jason, do you remember?
It was actually one of our friends down in outside of Fredericksburg, or I think the two family members. One of them was out of Williamsburg, and the other was out of
Bowling.
Yeah,
was Ronald Bowling. I think he won.
There you go. Yep.
So it was very cool. Very cool. Cool. All right, Jason, what was the takeaway from the tournament for you? Like something interesting that you saw?
Yeah. So number one, I thought that the custom terrain tables were awesome, but I think Javi Martinez's list, the triple flamethrower horns of Hashut, right? So I mean, he's the guy that took gave the hard loss to the Chimera list, right? And you could argue, you know, it was just like the perfect setup, but that's a war cry for you at times.
Yep.
But he had 55 battle points. He went out of the pool, right? We had 3 games in the pods. He went out of that pod with the highest score in that. He had 55 at a 3-0, right? And that,
which
and
means he only missed out on 5 points.
Yeah, right. And I remember him telling me as he play tested that list that triple fire flamethrower, you could just cover anywhere in the battlefield and have the threat of that. Plus, I mean, I still don't like the way the horns look in terms of models, but that flamethrower is no joke. And the ash grenade and smoke grenade, those are serious like control. Battlefield control abilities. So that really, I think I'm excited to see the horns be that high up coming out of the pods. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Yep.
I know Andy was a little frustrated because he had a Chimera behind cover, and because it's an ability that flame was hitting him with,
doesn't count. Yeah.
Cover doesn't matter. And he's just like, I'm trying to do what I can, but it didn't matter. You know,
it's not an
attack. Which doesn't feel. I kind of agree. It doesn't feel right. You know, because a flamethrower literally does use a lot. You know, it's not like a wizard bolt, like a wizard calling down lightning. They don't need to see you, right? They just need to know where you are.
Yeah, but you know, this isn't the only game that treats flamethrowers that way. I mean, even in Legion, the flamethrowing snow trooper ignores cover. It ignores cover, and it's just devastating up close. You roll an additional black dice for every model in the opposing unit, and it ignores cover. So it's not the only game.
It should ignore like foliage, and of course we could never get that like granular with which type of terrain is which. Because the terrain, the flamethrower should totally ignore some cover, right? You can't hide behind like a wooden cart
but like a stone wall.
Yeah, exactly. So that's interesting. Because JJ Austrian also did really well in his pool play with Horns.
Right.
Both of them lost all their games in bracket play actually, but they were really crushing it early in the tournament with Horns of Hashut.
Yep.
Yeah.
Really cool to see that.
And JJ told me that his games that he lost came down to him totally forgetting his secondaries and during the game, his tournament quest and the secondaries. So he was just playing the game and he's like, oh man, I forgot about these ones.
Right.
And had he gotten that one, which was an easy one for him to get, he's like, I would have won that game. Do you know what I mean? So,
oh no.
So like, I still think that they had a good showing from JJ as well. And he probably would have placed higher, which would have been interesting had he. I just think it was kind of the end of the day, and he was just kind of like, okay, like, just forgetting some of the little things with it. So that was kind of interesting.
And it's interesting because did we see any Rotmeyer Creed?
We did not.
No.
So out of that box, the horns came and they made a presence.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
People have been playing Rotmeyer Creed. You see them from time to time, but yeah, none of them at this tournament.
Yeah. My takeaway was Robert's list. Robert Visconti, right? Who people know as Girth Demon on the Discord channels and stuff like that. But listen, he put a lot of thought into that list, and we talked about it a little bit in our list show. But I didn't understand the combos that he had really thought through. And the main one that became very apparent during the games was the Cruel Boy's reaction, where he would position he would position himself, Hrothgorn, within 3 inches of a Cruel Boy's sticka, right? And then somebody would come within 3 inches of him, of that little model, and he would give Hrothgorn basically a reaction to make a bonus attack. So they're just tossing them their reactions, and he's just devastating them with that crossbow. So it came down to like his list really came down to control of the board, which is interesting, right? Because he played a control game that was offensive. It was an offensive control game because he had to control the board in such a way that models would move in without getting engaged, but move in within a space enough that he could then attack them and wipe them off the board, because like an extra bonus attack from Hrothgorn on a chaff is like goodbye. Like you're kind of gone. So he did really like that was a great thing. He had a Brugit. He had I think he had a Brugit. He had no, it was Quiv. He had Quiv that gave the bonus attack action as well. So basically that whole list was centered on feeding Hrothgorn extra attacks, right? And where he kind of, I think, ran into the buzzsaw a little bit was Justin's list, where Hrothgorn and a Gutlord ended up colliding and basically knocking both of each other off, like in round 1 or 2. You know what I mean? And so his big hammer was gone, but one of Justin's big hammers was gone as well. So but with that said, like I think it was just a really like well thought out list that I didn't understand until I saw it in action, and I'm like, wow, this was really, really good.
And he did catch that draw against Stormcast, and I'd be really interested because I was looking at the incredible stats on Hrothgorn, but the one thing is that actually killing Stormcast with that toughness 6 is actually really tough. So that might be like if you're worried about people locally picking up lots of Hrothgorns and having to deal with it in your local meta, you might want to think about, was that draw against Stormcast? Is that onto something? Like, is that going to be something that you can pick to fight against it? If you're kind of worried about people net listing Robert's list, because I do think that it was really impressive the way he applied it, and I think you could do interesting things in a variety of factions with Hrothgorn. But I listened back to our list show, and we did catch some of the combos when we talked about it. We talked about the Cruel Boy's reaction, and we talked about the Quiv stuff, and yeah, I think that's really, really impressive the way it all came together. That was really cool.
It was just more impressive to see it in person. It's almost like talking about like LeBron James's stats, but then you go see it at a Lakers game and you're like, oh my gosh, okay, I get it. You know what I mean? Like you're like, oh wow, this is amazing. I will say that I feel like the top 4 players of the tournament in the top bracket were very representative of who probably should have been there. like I think if Andy had run into Peter's list or if Andy had run into Justin's list, I don't know that the Chimera would have fared as well. I mean, we don't know unless they play, of course, and I think it would have been also a little scenario dependent too. But
yeah, I think the only list I saw that I thought could have machine gunned down some of the lists that were in the final four was that KO list that came in fifth with a 4-1 record where he lost on a treasure mission, which that mission, I do like it as a mission generally, but sometimes going first matters a lot. And
we'll
KO
talk
aren't
about
that
that.
KO aren't that great at treasure missions in general.
Yeah.
It's like the one kind of Achilles heel they've got. If that KO list had gotten into Reaper against any of the three non-shooting lists, like against the Horns, the Ogres, or the Gloomspite Gits, I think that KO list would have just machine gunned them off the board in Reaper. Um, but they lost in the pool play, so you don't get to do that. So that's kind of a
and I mean,
thing
he
about
did
the
play
bracket.
one of those lists. I think he play.
Well, it was Frothgorn versus KO.
Yep, that's right.
But on a treasure, those
right.
treasure
Yeah,
missions
yeah.
can be weird. But I do think I like Frothgorn specifically going into KO too, and so that's kind of smart by Robert because just the one big gun they have to set up their fight for profit combos, and in the time it takes them to do that, Frothgorn can take 2 shots, right? Because they've got to go it's a little like a Brewgate combo, right? They've got to go set up the ability, next activation, get the payoff. And so being able to get your shots in between those gives you a little advantage in the gun line battle.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I thought that the top finals were excellent matchups. I mean, they were some sweaty matches, right? That were happening. Justin Orton came out on top with his Double Trouble list, which is a nasty list that I played against. I played against that exact list at Adepticon, and specifically on Reaper with my Bone Splitters, and I just had no answer to it because he was able to basically corral all of his grots into a little corner and then basically guard the 2 entrances with the gut lords. I'm like, okay, well, this isn't going to happen. So, so anyway, but I think, good on Justin for winning. I think Robert did an amazing job. Like that game was an excellent game. Peter and Javi's game was amazing as well. Like it just was, so tight. Like both Javi and Peter are such methodical players that it was literally like watching. I mean, it was a chess match on the board as they were both trying to, outthink 3 steps ahead, and you could see them just like so intent on what was happening. And it was such a really, really good matchup there that happened. So congrats to, our top 4 folks that played. They were all, they all came to play in the tournament for sure, and had thought about their list for a long time before they came, and thought about the tournament missions as well. Like they were designed around the mission pack that we had put out, right? And I think that was a deciding factor in how well they did throughout the tournament. So, congrats to all of them. Anything else you guys want to bring up from the tournament before we actually start talking about the tournament itself and express our various opinions about how well we thought it did?
Sure, yeah, let's get into it. Let's move.
All right.
Move.
So one of the things that we decided to do is send out a little survey to our players just to kind of see what they thought about it. We had talked about in the beginning of the tournament and at the end of it that this was kind of an experiment. We wanted to try a more sports style tournament versus a straight Swiss that most of the Warcry community had done. And we wanted their feedback on it. I want to kind of set some kind of knowns as we talk about this. So we were supposed to have 32. We ended up having 25. And then we added StaffBot which was our night hunt list, to just make sure that we had round numbers so that nobody had to sit out a round or have a bye or something like that. And as predicted, StaffBot made it to the very bottom of the tables, as it probably should have, where it served its purpose like throughout the tournament. So if we had 32, I think it we would have had full 8-person pools, and we can talk about the impact of 6-person pools in the pool when we get to the pool play. But I just want to, so we didn't have a full tournament. I think drops are to be expected, and that's probably something that we need to think about how to incorporate in doing something like this. Because if there had been 32 full players, I think it would have not really changed the tournament a lot, but it would have made some weird things not happen as much, like ties on points and things like that, right? So, but anyway, let's get into it. So the first thing that we want to talk about, and this is one thing that I think we really harped on, was the idea of having a different point system. So what we did is we had a scaled battle point system, and we talked about this in our episode two times ago, where in the first 3 rounds in the pool play, we would take the victory points that you would earn, and there was a scaled system. So if you won a lopsided victory, you would win 20-0. If you won a much tighter game, it might be 11-9 or 13-8 or 15-5 or something like that. And if you drawed, it was 10-10. So the advantages, this is something that we took from Age of Sigmar. They've been doing that in their tournaments lately. And there's like people who love it and people who don't like it as much, because what it does is it rewards the losers, but it can punish the winners a little bit, right? Like if you end up winning, if you're talking about just straight battle points, if you end up winning, you may not win a major victory, which counts a certain, like, for example, in Warcry, if you won a major victory, it was straight up 20 points. A minor victory was 15. A draw was 10, right? So now if you win, even pretty good, you still may only end up with 15 points versus the 5 because your opponent ended up scoring some of their secondaries or got a couple of points or something like that. So it definitely rewards the loser for playing a very good game, but it can punish the winner for playing a decent game. It
can
it
punish
rewards
the winner for
Yeah.
running into a good player and managing to win. Like if you run into one of the best players in the tournament and you like play incredible and you win, you actually get punished. You can sometimes, not in this tournament, you had enough rounds, but in some tournaments doing it that way, you can actually get punished where you lose. You don't have a chance to win the tournament because you got paired against one of the best players in the room in round
Yeah.
2, and you like essentially got something that was only a couple points different than a draw. But it seemed like it didn't end up being an issue here, so that turned out fine. One thing I really like about it is like doing it based on how close the game was, like you guys did, is so much better than doing it
Yeah.
based on models killed, because some lists are not really trying to kill a lot of models.
Yep.
Yeah.
And other lists are like perfectly happy
just throwing models
sacrifice
at you.
throwing models away, right? Like I used to play Skaven in first edition. I played Skaven, and it's like I would be specifically aiming to be on top with only my Storm Fiend left. And one thing I learned after I played a tournament is like I keep catching minor wins every time, because it's
Right.
like the game was never in doubt, but it's like my whole list is meant to be like I overwhelm you on points, and my Storm Fiend is the enforcer,
Yeah.
and it's usually the only fighter left. And uh it turns out like you really can't play a list like that in a big tournament where the number of points you get matters if like models lost is
Yeah.
the definer. So I do like that a lot. I think that's really sleek, is what I meant to say. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we asked our folks what they thought about it, and 45% strongly liked it, 45% liked it, and 9.1% were neutral. So nobody disliked this at all. And in fact, I would say that it was, 90% liked or strongly liked it, right? And yes. I think that that's I think that's a telling stat right there.
To be fair, we've only got a little under half of the people who actually participated in the tournament have responded so far. So it's still a fairly young survey right now.
And but it gives questions us of like, would the people who were like didn't love it, like would they even be predisposed towards taking the survey? But
I know,
but I know when the numbers are this overwhelming, I think you're fine taking that takeaway out of it.
So I'll point out, we'll see this a little bit later. There were some people who really disliked the pool play, and that person was neutral on the battle scale. So it's interesting. Okay. They were kind of negative on the sports style tournament, but they were neutral on the battle point system. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That even for them, it was more positive than the actual tournament format. You know what I mean? So I think let's right here.
We got a lot of these to go through. So
do you believe that the scale battle point system accurately represents how you felt about the outcome of the game? So like if you had a close game, you got close points. Again, 90.
I think we can skip past this. We covered absolutely yes, right? Like exactly. We talked about that. It was a raging success.
Yeah, 90% again, right? Do you believe that scaled battle point system created a more positive or negative experience for players? So that one of the critiques of the battle point system that I had heard was, well, you're going to have players that are going to play more aggressively and really try to stick it to their opponent just so that they can get those battle points and potentially cause a negative play experience for them. So yes and no. I mean, it is a competitive tournament, right? Like, I think that we need to.
I mean, it's kind of the point, right? Is to encourage strong competitive play wherever you are.
Yeah. So
I get it. Like, not letting people coast. Some people want to coast. Like, I know it's a competitive tournament, but I get why some people would be like, yeah, I want to drink at my competitive tournament and I want to not try that hard if the game's not close. But, then you give your opponent a gift and you coast anyway and your opponent scores more points. Like, I think that should be fine. But it's like people's competitive edge overrides their want to not do. I don't know. I think it's fine. I think the battle point system was a huge success. That's my biggest positive takeaway from that tournament.
So I kind of confused one of the questions. This is just a positive experience, right? With battle points.
Sure.
This is the one that was, do you believe that it led to players playing more aggressively? 54% said no. Some said yes. And I followed up with the people that said yes. And they're like, but that was a good thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're like, yeah, people played more aggressively, but that was good because we're playing a competitive tournament. Okay. So, so I thought that was kind of interesting because people were like, oh, no, it didn't have really an effect. And some people said, yeah, it did for a positive reason, right? And so kind of interesting. We also got some, word feedback that said, like, I wish every Warcry tournament uses a scale, interesting concept, that kind of thing. So, Dan, I think your takeaway is that the scaled battle point system was a big success, probably the biggest success out of this tournament, right? And I think as a community, as we look towards tournaments, we should look at how we can incorporate a scaled battle point system into the standard if you're running a tournament. And it may not be how we did it, right, for these missions. It may not be our formula may not be exactly right, but I think the test proved that it was a good thing. And if we can kind of iron out some of the wrinkles that might have come up because of it, that I think we've got something winning for the Warcry community there, right? As TOs look to start their own tournaments and things like that. So, all right. So pool play. Let's talk about this. And Dan, I think you've got some feelings about the pool play. So it'll be interesting. What did you think about the pool play? It says here that about 80% of the people either liked or strongly liked it. 9% were neutral and 9% which represents like those 9% equals like one person because we only have 10 people basically, strongly disliked. Overwhelmingly the people liked the pool play, and it was for some of the reasons that you had talked about earlier, Dan. They loved being able to see what was happening in their pool, like after each game. Who am I going to be matching up against? Who's the potential collision courses that we're going to see? A lot of the feedback that we got was lean more heavily into pool play, which is put all the pools like at the same, like basically next to each other at the same tables, right? And really like encourage that kind of group playing. And because we had them randomized tables so that nobody was like playing on the same tables potentially, and got like advantage for knowing the terrain that well. But they were saying like, no, put us all like on one section of the table and then rotate us to another section.
I think
that has like 3.
I think that's a good example of like emergent community play, right? Like everyone getting this sense of, I want to be nearby the people that are in my pod or my pool so that we can hear each other yelling and screaming and seeing the dice rolls and get excited about that little group playing each other. I thought that was really interesting to hear that kind of feedback come out. It almost a little tiny culture.
Yeah, there's a social experience that emerges.
Social experience. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, this right here.
Hold on. I have a lot of things I want to talk about because I actually thought it was really problematic in a lot of ways. Now, the social stuff is really cool, but when you talked about why you wanted to do pool play, the big thing, like you said a few things, but one of the big things you said was to get people playing close games quicker. And I think it did the opposite of that by like a really wide margin compared to Swiss, because when you look at the actual results of the brackets that you ended up in, every single bracket had one list that just did not belong in that bracket and was way stronger than every other list. And so nobody had any close bracket play games because everyone was just getting laughed off the board by the one person who should not have been in that bracket because they just like ended up in a weird place in their pool standings. There were also kind of odd situations with the 6-person pools where, uh, like, who was it who had? I just know him by his online name, Kaler, but the person who had the Thunder Skinks on points had to play Robert, earned a draw, but he was 1-1 when he played Robert. He earned a draw, which is probably one of the most impressive results from anyone in the entire tournament, was getting that draw against Robert. But then he was punished because he'd been paired up, he gets that draw and then ends up like near the bottom of his pool because he got leapfrogged by a bunch of people, and then he just laughed people off the board in the next 2 bracket play rounds. And so you do end up with less compelling games. I've read a few tournament reports from people who are saying like socially really awesome, but like the games themselves were not very interesting. And I think it's because the pools create uninteresting matchups in the mid tables. I think they're really unfair to mid table players. But everything you said, like socially about the culture of each pool, is really, really cool. And of course, everything it does with the people at the very top is really cool. But it kind of makes me feel like it would be a better fit for like an invitational style tournament, where as opposed to an open tournament where like everyone is serious, like, and you guys said this is a competitive tournament and you call it a GT, which is like a very competitive name for a tournament. So I totally get that with the philosophy of what you're going for, is like, we want everyone here try harding to win. But to me, the reality of cons is like, only 40% at most of the people at any given open tournament are bringing something that they have any hopes of winning the tournament with. And I think it it puts a lot of the mid-table players in a weird position with the pools and how the pools shake out.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the screen share right now, Justin,
Yeah,
but you know, interesting because I wrestled a lot all through high school and went to tournaments like every weekend, right? And one thing that's interesting there is you still had kind of pods in those tournaments, but the people were placed in those pods based off of the running seasonal scores. And right now, Warcry is a stateless system, right? There is no concept of where you place in the rankings overall when you come into a tournament, right? Everybody gets a clean slate versus like AOS that has the ITC. So when you come into tournaments, like there can be some initial pairings based off of those scores. So if Warcry, I think in the future had some sort of seasonal thing like an ITC, then and had a larger community, honestly, if it grew to a larger community, then you could kind of take that kind of running seasonal standings into account when you built your pool or when you built your pods.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that would be cool. So when I go to Ultimate Frisbee tournaments, a lot of the big ones have power pools and lower pools. And then it's like it'll be 8 teams in the power pools, and the top, like after their round robins, there are two, the 2 round robins, the bottom 2 teams in each power pool will go down and face the top teams from the lower pools.
Yeah.
And they'll have a bracket, and then there will be a bracket of just the top teams. And you can kind of do that if you are able to pre-seed teams based on how they've been doing. So that would be really cool if we could have an ITC system like that. I was thinking while you said that, Jason, based on how much bigger the game is now than it was a year ago, and how much bigger it was a year ago than it was a year and a half ago, I would be surprised if 2 years from now we can pull something like that off.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the criticism is fair, right? Especially for the 6-person tournaments, because the issue that we in the pools, we ran Swiss style. We really did.
Mm-hmm.
What we did is we had the winners play the winners play the winners, right? And then you were basically ranked and seeded. Like if there was ties, you were ranked according to your battle points. And so we would match them up. First and fourth player, second and third would play, and then you kind of did that. So we used the Swiss system in there. It got a little goofy with 6 people.
Totally.
Right, because there was, and this only actually happened in Battle Group 2, where based on battle points and stuff like that, we had to. Justin had already played JJ, I think, like something had happened where that like the top 2 had already played each other, and we didn't want the rematch. Yeah,
Alex was number 1 after round 1. But he had to play someone who had actually lost in round 2, and then he actually lost to the person who'd lost or even though he'd won round 1 and they'd lost in round 1, he ended up losing to the person who had lost. And so then it left Justin and JJ, even though they had just played, they basically had a draw. Justin beat him like 11-9. And so then JJ was still number 2 I think, he was still number 2 in the rankings after Justin. And couldn't play him again. So
and so we had to kind of like do that. Now the other 6-player ones worked out actually fine, where the top 2 ended up playing the top 2. Do you know what I mean? And on the third one, like that worked out actually, not like we didn't have anything goofy. It was just that Battle Group 2 that had the.
To what I was saying, it was goofy for the mid-table players. It was goofy for almost all the pods were goofy on the mid-tables. And then when people ended up matching against the mid-table players from other pods, like weird kind of not close matchups ended up happening.
So
I don't think would have happened with Swiss.
I'm going to push back a little bit on your assessment that people laughed each other off the table in the finals, because I think that happened with the Chimera. But a lot of the other tables, like when we were getting victory points for Reaper, it was like 3-2. It was, it was very close matchups. And even the last one, like you talked to a lot of the players for the finals that they had. They were actually very close, and a lot of people told us like they thought that those matchups were pretty competitive and pretty close. And you'll kind of see it in the survey later on when we talk about the bracket system. But I don't know that there was too many lists that were laughing people off the table, especially at the end finals brackets in each of the ones. Because like when we were recording down the scores, which I wish we would have, and I told this to Jason, I wish we would have recorded the victory points for the last games, because that would have been good data to analyze as well. And it wasn't until like we had pretty much were cleaning up that I'm like, shoot, we blew it there, So to see that, so I want to address the next,
because we're also
question.
getting anecdotal data, because you're saying
Yes.
all of them were close, and I read multiple tournament reports that said none of them were close, and so it's like, well, our anecdotes here can't really, like,
Sure.
obviously we just read things from we heard from different people, and so obviously having the data is the plural of anecdotes.
Yep, totally.
So, yeah.
Inconclusive.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So right here, did you feel like 3 games was enough to determine ranking within the pools? And this is like overwhelmingly no, right? It was 54%, and 27% said yes, and 18% said don't know. So here's the thing. I don't think we had enough games for pool play, right?
Yeah.
And so this is I think the biggest critique of from me of our tournament, which is I don't think we had enough games. I don't think 5 was enough to use this system. Okay. And I think that we were trying to constrain it within one day. We're trying to keep it to 5 games, which was more than like I think a lot of other tournaments have done already. Like a lot of them are 4, and so 5 already was sort of pushing the limit. And if I had 6, I could have run this much differently, and I think that the pool play would have felt much more. So what I would have done if I had 6 games is I would have had 8 pools of 4 people in each. Okay. And that way everybody plays everybody in that pool. Okay. So you've got some very clear winners. And if you don't have clear winners, it means that everybody beat each other. You know what I mean? And that's where the battle points come into play.
And that's totally fair, right? Because it's like that's what should determine a really close pool. Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so that would be 3 games right there. If you've got 4 people in 8 things, that would be 3 games right there. And then what I would do for the 4th game is I would take the top 2 players from each bracket or from each pool and basically do a quarterfinals. Okay. So the number 2 from pool number 1 would play the number 1 from pool number 8. The number, and that kind of thing. Right. So you take the top 2 and do a quarterfinals. That'd be game number 4. And then you've got a semifinals that has, 4 people in there. And then you'd have a finals that would have 2. So
Justin, that makes me so excited for when we can finally have 2-day tournaments.
I know.
Could you imagine a big 2-day tournament? Because you could get even more thorough with 7 rounds, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then with 32 players, you could do some really cool stuff in terms of formats if you had 7 rounds to play with over 2 days.
So
I think
go ahead.
I think what you would find is day 1 would be full. Day 2 would have significant drops for people that were just done having fun. Right.
That's true. Yeah. And I think that's true of other 2-round.
It is.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yeah. And so what you would have, and so the other thing too is that if you only had 26 again or something like that, right? Like, or if you had 28, for example, then you could make your pools so that you would have, 7 of 4 or something like that. And you would still take the top 8. You take the top 2 from each bracket, but then you would go down and find the top points for like some wild cards to fill out the quarterfinals. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit more adjustable to get that quarterfinal round there than this was. You know what I mean? So I think the biggest Achilles heel, and I'm just going to put a bow on what I was saying here. I think the biggest Achilles heel of this system was that I didn't have enough games.
Yeah. I think I agree with you there. Do you think that pools, because I keep thinking about the open tournament format at cons
Mhm.
where everybody just signs up for as many things as they can and then just like they all double book themselves and then drop the
Yeah,
one they're less excited about the day of, which really annoys me, but people do that, and so there's
yeah,
always a ton of drops in every event, like across the con. Which if people just wouldn't do that, then more people could sign up for cons and it would be really great. But
right.
rant aside,
Yeah,
it it seems really hard to plan your pools where
right.
because like in a sports tournament, like you hold a fencing tournament, these people bought their own swords, they've been training all year, they're
Yes,
not going to
yes.
drop from the
Yep.
tournament, right? Uh, but like you hold a Warhammer tournament, I mean, yeah, they bought and painted their own models, but they could play those in multiple other systems too. So
This is
it's it's
the
tough.
invitational versus the open argument, right? Like,
Yeah,
do you extend an invitational where you know that those people are going to accept? And if
yeah,
they're not, they're going to let you know and you can backfill it with the next person on the list, right? Or whatever.
yeah.
Versus the actual like open that, you just kind of do whatever. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely something to that. In terms of like an open maybe needs to be a little bit more of an open format um, versus it because it is hard to plan numbers. Like, what if we got 39 or not 39, 29 people? You know what I mean? Like, that is
Yeah.
such a weird number to try to put into pools, you know? And so,
Do you think Warcry will be big enough in a year that you could have a GT and an invitational at some point during the GT could just be a 4 round Swiss
yeah.
and the top 3 players get invites to the invitational and the invitational is like you are inviting people and like you could do something like that. Um,
Yeah. I mean, look,
I'd
Age
be
of
interested.
Sigmar does. Age of Sigmar had the invitational on Thursday, right? Their 16-player invitational.
Uh-huh.
And then they ran the GT on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I think.
I think you have to,
Sure.
in
So,
order for us to grow there, it's not just about growing the community, it's about growing the support that GW will put into the game in terms of, prize support and publicity and those
True.
things to make an
Mhm.
invitational worthwhile for people.
You're right about that. And the thing I thought you were going to also say is grow the number of large tournaments. Like,
mm-hmm.
It's part of
for
it.
example, LVO was actually asking around for a Warcry TO to do a competitive Warcry tournament there, and like none of us could do it, and so that was too bad. LVO is not going to have a Warcry tournament, but I guess they were happy with how because that's run by Frontline, right? I think they were
Yeah.
happy with how everything went at Atlantic City when they ran it, and so they were asking if someone would do it for Vegas too, and no one could, but yeah, like getting to that point where we could have tournaments like Nova and Adepticon multiple times throughout the year. I mean, we got one 24-person, no, it was 23 in the end, 23-person
Mm-hmm.
tournament in Minnesota. That's pretty good numbers, right? That would count for a thing like that, but for the most part, uh, it's hard. Like that was maybe I think those are the only 3 competitive tournaments over 20 players in the US. We keep getting like 12 to 18 in a lot of places, which is awesome,
Yeah.
but like getting it in these cons would be big because it's we wouldn't be able to do like a cross Atlantic invitational very easily.
Right.
Um, yeah.
I mean, GW's been doing it with Kill Team and Age of Sigmar and 40K, right? They've got their November Worlds tournament that they do.
Hmm.
So, and they, like the winner of the London Open and some of these other ones are going to the Worlds, right? They get their golden ticket. And, I asked the GW rep last year if Warcry was ever going to be a part of that golden ticket system. And he said, yeah, yep, just wait, just wait. And then it's just been like crickets from them on that, and I think part of it is that we as a community aren't showing the strong interest behind it. Like my concern of doing a Warcry ITC format is that I don't think we have enough players willing to travel to LVO to play. You know what I mean? Whereas like Age of Sigmar, that is the largest Age of Sigmar tournament. They had like over like 300 players last year, which is insane for Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, and I mean the art. Even when you have RTs, some of those you're getting, you're getting 20 to 30 players.
Yeah.
So you're getting a large amount of play in between the major tournaments to build up the standings throughout the season.
Yeah. And anything we do has to reflect the Warcry community too. Like, for example, in Adepticon, that 3-1 bracket of people who did really well but weren't quite in the running to win the tournament, it was all narrative players. Even though it was a competitive tournament, it was entirely narrative players because it's like those are the people who just play a ton of Warcry.
Right.
Like that whole Madison crew, they only play narrative when they're playing pickup games.
Yep.
But because they play so much and because they explore so much of what goes on in the game, they just know the game better than most of the people who show up, right? So they just kick people's asses even though they're not necessarily like competitively oriented. And so it's a lot to think about because any kind of larger organizational system would have to reflect the fact that, uh, Eric Oakland is going around kicking people's asses, but he would never show up to. Well, maybe he'll hear this and disagree with me, but
Challenge
he
accepted.
would, from what I know about, like from the conversations I've had with him, he would never show up to like a competitive invitational hardcore situation,
Right.
even though he's absolutely one of the best players in the country, right? So it's like kind of tough. We'll have to think about like what kinds of like casual incentives for competitive play, right? That we'd have to get
Free
out
soda.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that, like, for example, if GW were to come out tomorrow and say, we have identified 4 major tournaments, or, like the ACO, the LVO, Nova Open, Adepticon, for example. 4 major tournaments where the top 2 will get golden tickets to come out to Atlanta in November and play the Invitational, right? And those golden tickets are like all expenses paid, like flight, hotel, tournament entry, all that stuff, right? And so, like, if they came out and said that, I think that we would have people coming to Warcry to like play competitively. You know what I mean? Because now there's something to play for.
That's true. We'd have people who aren't playing a lot of Warcry now who would play it. Yeah, 100%.
So
we got more.
Anyway.
More stats to go down here. Let's scroll.
Yeah.
Just I'll touch on this one. I said, at any point during pool play, did you feel like it wasn't worth playing anymore? Because, like, for example, one of the critiques was, I lose my first game, I know that I'm not going to make the top table, right?
Sure.
And with Swiss, I guess there is a way for you to come back and try for that, but
yeah, you can submarine win. Yeah.
Yeah, but it depends. I mean, you got to have a lot going for you to be able to do that too, though. So. But I think a lot of people said no, like they didn't feel like that. Neutral 18%. So 2 people said yes, right? That they felt like if they lost it wasn't worth playing anymore. So kind of interesting. Let's see. Yeah, we'll do this. So final brackets rounds. Okay. Did you like having a semifinals and final rounds after pool play? So one person said no. The rest said yes, and one person said Reaper made it weird, which I thought was interesting. They did not like the imbalance of Reaper as the first kind of semifinal game there.
Because it's so different from all the games that were in pool play. Like, because it's so different from every mission that was part of pool play. That kind of makes sense, actually. I hadn't thought about that, but that makes sense.
Yeah, and the reason why I put it as even the first mission there is that it is an elimination style game, right? Where it's either you win the round or you don't, or there's a maybe, but you play that game until you get a winner, basically.
Yeah.
Right. So that was a hard one because you couldn't put it in the pool play with our sliding point scale with the way that it was written.
Right. That's one that I know a lot of competitive players who really don't like Reaper. But it is one of the most popular, like, crowd pleaser ones. out in the packs. I personally really don't like Reaper, but I think it's perfectly fine to include it in a tournament because it's just so beloved by the community at large. I really do get it though, why someone would say Reaper made it weird. That's really interesting. Yeah.
I get it too. And I think it's an interesting feedback point. And, it's one of those that it's like, okay, well, if we're adjusting the points for tournament play for the community, right? If we're coming up with a solution that's a little bit better than what GW gives us, well, maybe we can come up with solutions for some of these missions where there's a Reaper style game that maybe is a little bit more, or maybe a little bit less weird, And I know that you've been developing your title pack, right? The Salty Sea title pack, and maybe there's some tweaks in there that you've done to Reaper that might make it feel a little bit more balanced, so that it's not like I think this Reaper really goes against horde armies, right? Like it's not good for horde armies. Like elite armies that can do a lot of damage, like can sometimes
It's
dominate
okay for some horde armies. Like you can do a horde KO army and Reaper's okay. Sometimes it's just like whatever the biggest thing is, that just wins because everything else bounces off the biggest thing. And it's like the round they kill
like
the
a Chimera?
biggest thing. Yeah, the round they kill the biggest thing, they win that round, but it's like a guaranteed 3-1 win, you know?
Yeah,
Because they'll
exactly.
eventually take down your big thing, but then you just win 3-1. And so that can be weird with Reaper. Like it's like sometimes you just know who's gonna win before the dice even get rolled, which is not the best experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something that gave me pause. I'm like, okay, that's really interesting feedback, and I want to take it to heart for the next time that we do it. All right, so this is an interesting one here. For the most part, did you feel like players were appropriately grouped for their bracket? 18% said strongly agree. 36% said agree. So that's like 55%-ish, something like that. Maybe close to 60. 36 said neutral, and 9% said disagree. So more than half thought that it was appropriately competitive. And then again, this is 10 responses. So we're talking about like 6 people thought that, they're appropriately grouped, and like 4 people thought that they weren't, right? So, or that they thought it was neutral, and then 1 person didn't think that it worked out. So,
11 responses, so it was 6 and 5. Yeah.
So, and so this is funny because maybe some of the people that you talked to and some of the people I talked to were in the neutral or the the positive. So and I'm not discounting what you said. I think that's interesting. I hope more people take the survey so that we get better data on that, right? And like I said, I wish I would have kept those battle or the victory points to show if the games were really competitive. Like my initial impression as I entering the scores were that they were. But that's also me trying to manage the tournament and all that stuff. So my memory is not like super clear on that.
Right.
I'll put that out. Yeah. All right. Did having different competitive final bracket levels encourage competitive play up until the end? So this is 90% said yes, and 9% said neutral. So I think a lot of people said that they felt like they had something to play for.
Yeah. Even if
go ahead,
half of them felt like, even if only half of the people felt like people were in the right brackets, almost all of them felt like the brackets encouraged competitive play.
That's awesome. That's so cool. And it makes a ton of sense. Like when I was saying it was so bad for the mid-table players, the opposite is true for the low-table players, where low-table games in Swiss can just feel kind of hopeless, but like you gave them something to play for in the low tables. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's funny. We have a friend who plays AOS, and they have kind of a clan or guild or whatever they want to call it, where they call themselves the bottom table bullies. Where like, if they get kicked out at the top round, but they're like top tier players, then they're down at the bottom table with someone who's just learning the game and they're just crushing them. Right. But this tournament, I think, at least, like you said, maybe problem in the mid tier, but in the bottom tier, it was like, it was all people that were in that kind of skill area.
And they were trying to win to get their bracket win.
To get their bracket win.
That's pretty cool.
And we had prizes for each of the bracket winners. So even your second to bottom bracket got a prize. So
there was an incentive to keep playing.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think people who do, because I'm coming out of this like I will be running Swiss at every tournament that I run. Um, but it does, I've had multiple tournaments I've tried to experiment with giving people things to play for that aren't necessarily tied to winning and losing. And this really makes me wanna like double down on doing more and more for people who aren't winning. Like I've done a few tournaments where there were narrative quests that you could achieve without winning your game that could then count towards prizes. And I think if you're gonna run a Swiss tournament, you have to reckon with this graph right here because I do think your format does this much better than Swiss does. Um, and I think giving like extracurricular achievements in Swiss is really important to keep people engaged. Uh, whereas your bracket play did keep people engaged in the last two games, which is really cool.
And what was interesting is a lot of them said, like, I can see who I'm going to potentially match up with. Right. And so it wasn't like Swiss is kind of one of those things that you feel like it's voodoo magic in the background on who you're going to end up placing with later on. You're like, wait, am I going to place here or here? Because like the algorithms go win losses, battle points, like strength of schedule, like
can be overwhelming to people.
Yeah.
Especially like in the lower half of the tournament, like in the lower third and the low tables, it can be really overwhelming to kind of see what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, anyway, so I thought that was really cool. Yeah. All right, let's see. There's a lot of text there, that folks talked about. All right, overall tournament experience, 90% was excellent or very good.
Every single response positive. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that was really nice.
That's so awesome.
Did you feel that the tournament was competitive? I mean, 100% either agree or strongly agree, right? I heard some people say that they felt like this was the most competitive tournament that Warcry has had to date in terms of
I would say in the US, 100%.
Yeah.
They get cutthroat in Spain and Poland, man. It's crazy over there. You should usually like go dig into some Spain and Poland tournaments. I saw a Spanish tournament. It was like 22 players and 12 of them had Soulblight Gravelords. I swear to God. It was so silly. And Poland has some tournaments like that too.
Yeah. All right. So do you feel that the tournament was appropriately competitive at each round? 63% said yes. 27% said no, and someone kind of wrote in some final bracket pairings got a little wonky. First round is always a crapshoot, which is fair, right? And I mean that's kind of how it is. The first round pairings is a crapshoot, and that's going to be true of this style or Swiss style, right? First round brackets.
I think this is one where we need a larger sample set to kind of balance this one against the question above that was kind of related to it on competitiveness throughout the tournament.
Right.
And whether or not competitiveness is what people are looking for necessarily at every stage of the tournament.
Yeah.
Like you guys ran a very like a tournament style that encourages a little bit people to bring their cut through out, right? Which, maybe we'll get to later kind of has some positive and negative implications. And whether or not that's what people want is kind of a fair question to ask folks.
Yeah. Do you believe that the final standings were an accurate reflection of tournament play? 63% said yes, 9% said no. Someone said love seeding known competitive players into different pools. So that was unintentional, right? So, for example, Peter, Justin, Javi, like Robert, like they all ended up in different pools. And the way that I seeded this is because I didn't want to be accused of like playing favorites or anything like that. I literally took their sign up order that they had, like 1 through 32, and I snaked it right across into the different pools.
Oh yeah.
And so
that seems like a perfectly fair way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was random because it was based on their order sign up, their timestamp of when they actually registered for the tournament, and then just kind of snaked it back and forth. And that's kind of what I ended up with. So, anyway, someone said the final standings were a bit hard to decipher. I felt like I only saw my points from the first 3 games, which was true. Again, we didn't enter in the victory points from the games, and so it was a little bit harder to read. So I think that this was a formatting issue on our tournament, like for the brackets versus the pool play. The pool play was much easier to read and understand. And then someone talked about the paint contest scoring, which didn't come into play in the final standings. Actually, that was just the best overall.
Yeah, that was just for the best of GUR award.
Best of GUR. So our best of GUR took the pool points and the painting points. It didn't take into account the overall, right? So
and you guys are talking about overall. I mean, you guys talk about best general as tournament champion, just generally. I think of best all around as tournament champion, but I wish there was a better way to cover that race in general in Warcry, because I think it's really valuable. We're here as, people who play a game that has multiple aspects to it, but we haven't really figured out the best way to cover that. Maybe next time I TO a large tournament, I'll host you guys talking about my attempts to kind of do that. I wish we'd actually done that last January when I hosted 24 players, because we would have had a lot to get into there. So yeah, I think people who are kind of confused about that sort of dichotomy, this isn't really the tournament to get into it, I would say.
Well, and I will say too that Age of Sigmar still has a problem of like what best overall means. Do you know what I mean? Like they're still wrestling with the right formula, and they've been doing it for like 10 years now. You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting. Let's see. Okay. What do you think about this sports style format? 45% strongly liked, 27% liked, 18% neutral, 9% dislike. So I think people like the format of the thing. Now the next question is, I think, the interesting one. If you have previously played us in a Swiss style tournament, how would you compare the sports style to Swiss style? So you can see that this pie chart is much more spread out here, right? So 27% like sports style better, 27% like or strongly like sports style better, 27% like sports style better, 18% said both are fine, 18% said they like Swiss style better, and then 9% said strongly like Swiss style better. So what is this, like 6 out of 11 like Swiss style, like the sports style?
And this is pretty scary, given that out of 11 responses, the people who are pumped about the tournament are a lot more likely to respond than the people who aren't. So that is a little worrying, but I think it is, you can have the fewer tournaments do it the way you do it, the more unique and cool it makes it that you're doing the tournament that way. You know what I mean? Like, so having one tournament on the calendar that's sports style, and that is the special thing about the sports style tournament, makes it cool, I think. Like based on what I saw, I would prefer Swiss style, but that's like other tournaments are Swiss style, so I think it's fine that you have the sports style thing if you can kind of get the pool stuff, more to your satisfaction.
So one thing that I want to kind of respond to is there were some folks that watching the tournament happen that had some, like, a lot of opinions about the tournament and how it was run and stuff like that. And I as I was reading it, I was just kind of like, but they weren't here. Like, they weren't here to experience the tournament. Some of those folks that had some strong opinions, and like, I'm not discounting their ability to have opinions or their right to have that opinion or to formulate it from that way. But it definitely was a different feel when you were actually playing in the tournament, and the folks that walked away and like they're like, this was an awesome event. This is a good event. Now, part of it is that some people just like the event. Do you know what I mean? They just
the most important thing about being a TO is vibes, and that's like not something we're even talking about here, but absolutely, like, some people, if you just have good vibes at your tournament, people are going to have a great time, and whatever you did format wise, people are going to say that's like one of the best formats to do.
Sure.
Even if it has very little to do with the format itself.
So to me, the data is like, do we do more tournaments like this and kind of see how things go? You know what I mean? Like, as time goes on and people have more experience with Swiss versus sports style, are they going to change our tune? Because, you know, like maybe they'll have a bad experience with the sports style or a great experience with the Swiss style. You know what I mean? And they have enough experiences where they can say like, okay, like, you know, the kind of the cards are all on the table now, and I can judge now like what I kind of like better, right? Because I don't think a lot of people had experience with this in terms of a Warcry tournament, and so there's a novelty about it too that I recognize.
Yeah,
that's happening there, but I think that the responses were kind of interesting there. Let's see. Are you planning to come back? Yes. You know, maybe. This is the interesting one. Would you like to see the tournament expanded to 6 games this year? There's only one person that said no, 5 is enough. Oh, you have people that said yes, like over 2 days, 1 day. One person's like, I want 8 games. You know, like
this does seem like it really just tells you that the Warcry diehards are the ones who responded, and the casual fans are the ones who didn't respond, which does kind of have to skew how you interpret the responses overall.
Yep.
Sure.
It was really smart of you to ask this question and the previous question, because this really teaches you a lot about who was responding and who wasn't.
Yeah, for sure. So you know, it's kind of interesting. Last one is prize support. So then we asked about just kind of like overall stuff. And one of the things that kind of stood out, like we got a lot of good feedback from people, like in terms of like the TO. One of the things that I want to talk about is people really hated treasure hunters. And I think we touched on that a little bit. So we need a new treasure mission, whatever we're going to do. No matter if we're doing Swiss style or sports style, we need a new treasure mission.
Yeah, 100%. I've done some attempts to see if it's like totally screwed to the person who goes first, and the data doesn't necessarily show it, but man, like everyone who plays it, it's like so many people hate that mission. So even if you think it's a good mission personally, it's like not a crowd pleaser.
There was a game in Age of Sigmar called Duality of Death, and it was the same way. If you could go first, then you could get your things up there and block. And if you could hold on to both objectives for at least one round, then you only had to hold on to one objective for the rest of the game, and then you would win automatically. You know, and so this kind of felt like that to me. Do you know what I mean? So anyway,
I'd say that was probably the most questions that were asked is, wait, so if I'm holding the treasure, what are my movement restrictions again?
Yeah.
Like that was like the number one question asked.
Yeah.
So one of the things that came up that I feel like we want to talk about, and this is going to seed our topic for, I think, our next Winning Warcry. As we saw the tournament, and again, I think a lot of people said this was the most competitive tournament that they've been at, right? As we saw the competition heat up in this tournament, we saw some of the negative aspects of competition sort of pop up a little bit. We had a couple of people that, you know, were saying like, hey, you might want to check that guy because they're measuring front to back or back to front when they or front to back on their bases, like basically giving themselves an extra inch of movement, you know, and you know, they felt like they had to bring it up for us to watch. And, you know, what we tried to do as TOs is monitor a lot of that stuff as best as we could, and try to stay on top of it. I know personally, I was asked a lot of questions about like, hey, can you measure this for me and make sure they're within 3 or they're within 6 or something like that, and make a call, because the 2 players couldn't agree on that. And that's exactly what a TO should be doing, right? Like if the players can't figure it out, a TO is there to help judge.
And some of the players were very they were good sportsmen and very polite about it. Like a couple of those questions, it was after the game was over, they came up and said, hey, man, I want to watch this. with this one player, because it was almost like, I think they don't understand how to play. Like, maybe you could help show them how to play, or just watch them and make sure they don't make that mistake again. So that was actually really respectful, I thought, the way they did that. Some of them did it.
And as you know, as folks get more competitive, right? There's folks that end up starting, they feel the pressure, they want to win, they've got that drive to win, they've got that competitive desire, and sometimes what happens is they start to angle shoot a little bit, right? And what I mean by angle shoot is they may try to bend the rules a little bit, or what you see a lot in a lot of war games like 40K or Age of Sigmar is you'll see like fast dice rolls, right? Where it's hard for the opponent to see kind of like how they rolled and see what happens, or lack of clarity in the rules of their warband, a lack of clarity of explaining what their warband does. So there's some gotcha hammer moments that happen, right? And I think there's a lot of like player etiquette that sometimes gets lost by the wayside as the competitive nature heats up. And, like it came to our attention, like in the last game of the finals that, there likely seemed that there was some illegal moves that happened, or there was, and there was some, lack of clarity around how certain abilities and things like that worked. And, that honestly a little bit breaks my heart, because I think that we tried to do a really good job of staying on top of these things. And when we're talking with players, I say, like, please come and talk to us about this in the moment, right? Please come and like let us kind of help be the judge. We can be the asshole here. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can be the guy that's the jerk and says, no, you can't move your model there, or like that's impossible, or you're moving your guy too much. Like, we can be that guy. But if we don't know about it until it's over, like there's not much that we can do about it in the moment. But what that does is it ends up raising the question of like, what can we do better as a community? What can we do better as tournament organizers to make sure that as the competition raises up, which I think is a sign of a very healthy game that GW has, right? As the competition's getting better, how do we make sure that there's a framework, that there's a rubric, that there's policies and procedures and a code of conduct and all that kind of stuff in place, so that if folks are kind of shaving corners a little bit to try to get that advantage, that we all make sure, no, you can't shave that corner. That corner is there for a reason. You know what I mean? And, we just make sure that it's fair play. So that's something that came up. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that you want to express, but that's kind of what I was thinking about. Some of it as well.
So I have a few different thoughts on it. One thing I wanted to bring up that you didn't there is there's sort of two pieces to this. One is, if you see something from your opponent, and a lot of the kind of unfortunate outside the rules things, a lot of them come with not a lot of, there's a difference between sloppy play and bad faith play.
Sure.
A lot of people accidentally give themselves an advantage through sloppy play, and you should always feel comfortable to bring the TO over when you see that. That person's probably not cheating if they're just sloppy, right? But the TO does need to tell them, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. Because that's partly a game education situation. Now, that's a little different than bad faith play,
Sure.
which can be really tough in the moment because it's often accompanied by a little bit of badgering, a little bit of mild bullying, a little bit of like questionable table manners. It can be difficult. You can get emotionally flooded as a player who is on the other side of bad faith play, and it can be hard to remember to talk to the TO. I think also some people have a worry that if the person that they think is playing in bad faith knows the TO by name and, is like known in the community that the TOs won't side with them. And one thing I'd say to folks who feel that way is like, call the TO anyway. It's going to teach you. The worst they can do is give you a bad ruling, and then you know that that TO is a bad TO. But at least give them the chance to prove to you that they can deal with you fairly, even though they know the other person's name and they don't know yours. Like, at least give your TO a chance to prove that they're here trying to do the best job they can. And if you do see something, if you do feel like you are being the victim of bad faith play, let people know immediately. Now, the flip side of that, the other thing I wanted to say is it's not really the victim's responsibility to bring the, you know, other person to justice, right? Like, it is on us as TOs always in any tournament that we run to be the ones proactively making it very difficult to play in bad faith. And I think that's part of what we'll get into next month, right? At least based on what you were telling me about was maybe next month's outline. I think that'll be a really good topic.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this as well, and I think you hit a big point there, Dan. Is you have to not be afraid to call the TO over, right? It's not like going teacher, you know, so and so said, you know. I think even I have games where I play with longtime friends and we'll call a TO when we aren't sure on something. And it's almost a form of protection with your friendship with the person you're playing, right? It's, hey, we don't have to take on the responsibility of having to make a judgment call that may make one of us feel bad about the game. Let's give that to the TO and let them deal with it. It's their responsibility. We can still be friends and good matchmates across the table. Let's let the TO have the difficulty of making the judgment call on this decision for us. That's the point of the TO. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to do that. And I think as the community learns, if someone wants the TO to come over, they're doing that to protect the relationship that they have with you as their opponent across the table. That's a good view to have on that. And also, which seconds your second point, which I think is valid too, is as TOs, let's be, as the community is getting more competitive, let's strengthen ourselves as TOs. Let's sharpen our edges and let's be a little more aware. A great example here, as you can see right in the middle of the table, right? Supervise the last match. When you've got a really important match, I know I was spending a lot of time at the table making sure I was getting the numbers into the Excel spreadsheet properly. And could have probably just paused that for a moment and gone over and watched that match a little bit closer because, you know, it's game 5, long day. People are getting tired. There's, you know, it's human nature. We're competitive. We want to win. We might try to cut corners. We might also just be tired and be cutting corners without knowing it. So it could be a combination of both. And having a TO there when it really is important there at the end, it's important for us as TOs to do that, to provide that support to the players.
Do you think StaffBot needed to drop for the last round?
It was dropped. Did.
Oh, it was? Okay.
It was. I think the problem was just we were busy like tallying like the points. I think one of us was running to try to get the prize support from the tournament itself.
Which is another issue. The prize support, timing, and all that stuff.
We were doing a lot of stuff that we could have just paused.
It's true.
And gone over there.
Yeah. That's really, and the more players you have, especially if you're not using BCP, the harder it gets to sort of do all of that tabulating and TOing. Because like I've played in a 12-person tournament that I TO'd and it worked fine. And I ran when I ran the tournament last January with no BCP, I didn't have a single moment of downtime and I wasn't playing. And I literally did not breathe once. And so, it can be pretty overwhelming, which definitely, as TO science, the more we streamline for ourselves, the better we can serve our players.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Jason.
Last thing I was going to say is people are TOs for a reason. Like, we love the game and we love watching and helping other people have good experiences with the game. So that's another thing. Like, use your TO because there's a reason they are a TO. They want to be a TO. They're volunteering. They're helping. And we like to help. I mean, it's also, I think, in human nature to want to help others have a great experience. And it's a fun thing to do. And that's why, Justin and I were TOs and ran this. So the more I loved it when I was sitting at the table and someone said TO, I was like, yes. And I get up and grab my books. Hey, what's up? What can I do? What's going on?
Right. Yeah.
So that's fun. And so call on your TOs. They're there to take that burden away from you so that you can maintain that good relationship with the person across the table from you.
Yep. Yeah, I think, in terms of streamlining, and I think next is going to be talking about, like, as players, how to be better as our competitive environment grows. But as TOs, like, one thing that Jason and I absolutely talked about, right? I mean, immediately as we were driving away from the event, was we need an app to kind of do this, and like, if it's BCP, that's great. We haven't gotten a lot of BC support. I don't know if you've noticed, but not all the factions are updated in there. I've emailed BCP several times to get it
all
updated.
All 5 Stormcast factions are rolled into one, which is
exactly.
Tough.
And so I mean, that's one thing. It's not a lot of BCP support. And then when I asked them about support for this event that has the sport style, they told me, yeah, we can't really help you. So we needed to come up with our own way.
Swiss over there.
Exactly. And so we needed to come up with our own way. And Jason and I talked about, like, okay, well, like, maybe we'll just make an easy algorithm program. And Jason's better at, like, programming than I am, but it doesn't have to be anything too complicated. But, you saw us at one point messing with formulas because Google Sheet messed us up. We had formulas perfect. And then when we sorted, it messed all of the formulas up as soon as we sorted it, and so then we had to, like, struggle with that again. And that's just kind of like TO stuff that if we can cut the fat there, that'll help. And one of the things that I would love to do, and again, we talked about this, is we want to stream the top table for each round that we're looking at. And so, of course, there's going to be a TO monitoring that, right? Because you've got to, like, monitor the setup and watch it and stuff like that. And so the idea of, like, a TO supervising the last match is going to be a no-brainer for that one, because they're watching the stream and making sure that it's going off well, you know what I mean, and stuff like that. So anyway, that's those are some things that we kind of thought about that we could do to make this better. But I think our next episode is going to focus on players, and then also how do we as a community create a rubric or a framework that we can again, it's like we've planted a baby tree, and we need to make sure that it doesn't get blown over in a hurricane. You know what I mean? Yeah. And the hurricane is competitive play, which is great, because that hurricane brings water and all the nutrients that it needs for that tree to grow, but it also can bring, like, stifling winds. And so if we make sure that we give it the proper support, then it's going to grow into a really nice tree one day. And I think that that's where we're at with Warcry right now. We've planted this tree and it's growing, and we just need to give it the support we need. So that'll be next time's topic. So, in the meantime, Dan, thank you for coming on. Thank you for helping analyze and providing a different perspective on this tournament. I knew it was coming, and I appreciate it, because part of it is like, it is kind of my baby, and it was mine and Jason's baby. And when you get feedback about your baby, sometimes you don't like to hear it. It kind of looked like both of us, Jason. Baby. It looked like us, both of us. It doesn't work. It had your eyes.
And I would say to the other people like me who had criticisms of the format, don't ever criticize something without putting real effort into understanding what is good about that thing. And, like, this, I think, really proved that there are some real positives to what you guys were doing. And, innovating and trying new things with every big event is really important and really awesome. And I'm really glad that you guys did that.
Yeah. So, it's all about getting better, which is why we sent out this survey, right? Which is why we are listening to the feedback and stuff like that. And we just want to make it better. So we appreciate you being on, Dan, and kind of helping us work through this. And Jason, of course, it's always a pleasure. Thank you all to all the listeners that listen to us throughout this. And Go out and play some more tournaments. Go out, organize some more tournaments. Let's get this Warcry community and competitiveness moving up so that maybe one day we can all get golden tickets and meet each other in Florida or whatever they're going to have it. So that would be amazing. So anyway, everybody have a great night. Thank you so much. And we'll see you all at the tables.